Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving into a really powerful message from the ancient prophet Isaiah. He asks a question that's just as relevant now as it was then. What's the point of all our religious rituals if our hearts aren't in the right place? We're going to see how his blistering critique of empty faith leads to one of the most incredible visions of peace you've ever heard.
Right off the bat, Isaiah confronts us with this question that just cuts right to the chase. It's something we all probably wonder about from time to time. What's the real difference between just looking good and actually being good? Is going through the motions really enough?
All right, let's get into it. The core problem that Isaiah saw was this huge gap, a real chasm actually, between what people were doing in their worship services and what was actually going on in their hearts and, just as importantly, in their communities. And get this, through the prophet, God himself asks this absolutely stunning question. It's not like he's against the idea of sacrifices. No, he's asking, what do they even mean? What's their value when the spirit behind them is just gone? You know, the people were checking all the boxes. They had the festivals, the special days, the burnt offerings, the whole shebang. But Isaiah says God saw it all as hollow, as empty. In fact, he says their worship had become a burden, a real weariness to God.
So Isaiah doesn't just kind of suggest they change things up a bit. Oh no, he delivers a scathing rebuke, a full-on indictment of this empty religiosity. He pulls absolutely no punches.
I mean, the message could not be more blunt. Stop bringing meaningless offerings. He doesn't just say they're empty. He says their incense, a symbol of prayer, is detestable. It's like all the outward actions were just a cover for this deep internal void.
And this creates such a powerful image. Isaiah describes them in the posture of prayer, raising their hands up to heaven, a classic sign of piety and devotion. But then he just completely flips that image on its head.
And boom, there it is. A shocking, stunning accusation. Now he's not being literal, of course. He's talking about the blood of social injustice, the blood of oppressing the poor, of ignoring the vulnerable in their society. Their hands were stained with the consequences of their actions, which made their pious-looking prayers a total and complete contradiction.
Okay, so after that devastating diagnosis, what's the cure? Isaiah doesn't just leave them with the criticism. He lays out a really clear, super practical, two-part prescription for how to actually heal this spiritual crisis.
The very first step is this key Hebrew concept, teshuvah. Now, this is way more than just saying, oops, I'm sorry. It literally means to turn around, to do a complete 180-degree turn. It's about completely reversing your direction. You turn away from all the harmful stuff, and then you turn toward God.
And here's the plan in all its brilliant simplicity. Step 1 is all about what to stop doing. Wash yourselves, remove your evil deeds, cease to do wrong. Basically, stop the harm. It's only after that that you can move on to step 2, the positive part. Learn to do good. Start the healing.
And this shows us exactly what doing good looked like to Isaiah. It's not some vague, fuzzy feeling. It is concrete social action. It's about seeking justice, it's about correcting oppression, it's about defending the most vulnerable people in society, in their day the fatherless and the widow. For Isaiah, you simply cannot separate true spirituality from real-world social justice.
Okay, so after that really tough diagnosis and that demanding prescription, Isaiah delivers one of the most beautiful, just breathtaking promises of grace and forgiveness in all of literature.
God makes this incredible offer. He basically says, come on, let's talk this over, let's sort it out, and to explain the sheer depth of his forgiveness, he uses these powerful, vivid images from the world they lived in.
Now, to really get this, you have to understand the context. That crimson dye they used came from a crushed insect, the tola worm, and it was famous for being permanent. It was a color-fast dye, an indelible stain that you literally could not wash out. So sin is like that unerasable stain. And yet God promises a forgiveness so complete. It's like the pure, brilliant white snow that stays year-round on Mount Hermon. It's a radical, seemingly impossible kind of cleansing.
But this foundation of personal and social change, that's just the beginning. From here, Isaiah casts an even grander vision, a vision for the future of the entire world.
He looks ahead to a time he calls the last days, where the entire dynamic of the world just shifts. Instead of nations constantly fighting for power and dominance, he sees them all streaming together, like rivers flowing to one source, to learn a better way to live.
And this shared journey for wisdom leads to what is maybe the most famous prophecy of peace ever written. It is a vision of total,
absolute transformation. So the symbolism here is just so powerful. This isn't just about putting down weapons. It's about reforging the very tools of death into tools of life. A sword, designed only to kill, becomes a plowshare, used to grow food. A spear, made for war, becomes a pruning hook, used to care for vineyards and help things grow.
And here's the key takeaway. This isn't some fragile truce negotiated by politicians. Isaiah's vision is of a permanent, divine peace. A peace so deep, so complete, that the prophet says humanity won't even learn war anymore. Think about that. The entire skill set for fighting will be forgotten, lost to history.
And that's the profound challenge Isaiah leaves us with, to imagine, and maybe even to start trying to build, a world that is fundamentally reordered, not around conflict and power, but around justice and peace. A peace so total, we literally forget how to fight. What would a world like that even look like?